Welcome to this very special report edition of Hyperinflation Report number 2 with Mr. Rob Kirby. You can find his work at KIRBYanalytics.com. Mr. Kirby, welcome back to the show.
Oh, pleasure to be with you again, Jean-Claude.
I'm excited to have you on. And just as we were going live here, you and I were kind of reminiscing on all the crazy things that are happening here in Canada since the last time you and I spoke. And we had quite some fun the last time talking about the houstings and the political trail of Mr. Trudeau during the last election. But that's going to be for another episode, maybe, so we don't get into too much trouble. Actually,
here. Jean-Claude, since we last spoke, I managed to have a dinner with Chris Guy, who was actually a very interesting fellow.
Yeah.
And we managed to have a dinner in a restaurant at an undisclosed location where we didn't have to wear masks.
Wow, that's interesting.
Just saying. Just throwing that out there.
You're such a rebel, Mr. Kirby. Watch out, man. Anyways, there's Chris there. Hopefully one day I can get him on too. Probably not here on YouTube. That's going to be impossible, but maybe on our private server. It'd be fun to get him on. There's a lot going on here, and he's been on the forefront of this fight for sure. In the conversation today about this hyperinflation report number 2, I'm excited to have you on, and I think we have great timing here. Let me bring up this poster. This was posted on Zero Hedge earlier this morning, and of course, this was Janet Yellen facing the nation and, of course, lying about inflation. So we've got the boiling frog jumping out of the water here. Where do you want to start, man? There's so much happening here with the balance sheet, all of these rumors of tightening, and, you know, we're seeing the issues with the bond debacle in China. It seems to me, as we're seeing in this picture here, that everything is, in fact, coming to a boil at the same time. So the microphone's yours here, Rob. Let's try to dive deep into this and share with the audience here what you think is really happening in this crazy world of ours.
Well, the messaging coming from central bankers, whether it's in Canada or the United States or anywhere else in the Western world, the messaging is that inflationary pressures are a temporary phenomena. I think the speak that they're using is that it's transitory.
Mm-hmm.
I know that the central bank head in Canada has indicated and is speaking as if we're going to have 5 interest rate increases between now and the end of next year. I find that a little hard to wrap my head around. I don't believe that will actually occur, but I'm not saying that they won't keep up the rhetoric or the threats or I don't know. I call them insults at this point, insulting us by saying that rates are going to go higher.
Mm-hmm.
When, in my view, there's no way they can raise rates without absolutely deep sixing the economy. And not that the economy is doing great right now, but raising rates 2 or 3 times would absolutely bury the economy in my books. So I think the real issue is there's cliche saying, listen to what I say, but pay closer attention to what I do.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to me that what the U.S. Fed is actually getting us or preparing us for is basically easier money coming probably in the new year, first thing. I believe that will occur. I don't believe that there's going to be any substantial tightening whatsoever. I look at the growth in the Fed's balance sheet over the last year. I mean, if we were having this discussion a year ago at this time, the Fed's balance sheet was 3 and change trillion in size.
Mm-hmm.
That 3 and change trillion at this time last year was up from under $1 trillion when we got into the financial crisis back in 2008-9. But anyway, the balance sheet in the last year has grown from 3 and change trillion. Last week alone, it went up 88 billion. I think that was a record increase in 1 week. And the Fed's balance sheet, as of the end of last week, stood at 8.66 trillion. So the degree of monetization of U.S. government debt issuance is, let's just say, extreme. The Fed is buying the debt of the US government that it issues.
Mm-hmm.
This will create a scenario where the world will repudiate the dollar completely in international trade. And that is absolutely baked into the cake. I believe we're seeing evidence of this already occurring. Countries around the world are settling trade in other than dollars, but nobody dares speak of it in the mainstream media.
Mm-hmm.
And people might say, well, Rob, how do you know that there's trade settlement occurring in other than dollars? All I need to do, Jean-Claude, is look at the volume, the dollar volume of crypto transactions. And the dollar volume on crypto transactions on a daily basis now is often in excess of 150 billion a day. 150 billion a day translates into over 50 trillion a year in crypto transactions. To get to a number that big in annual crypto transactions, I would tell you that there is necessarily international trade settlement occurring, or you can't get to a number that big. You see, people don't understand how big a trillion is. And before we went live, you and I were kibitzing just a little bit. And I asked you, how long do you think it takes to count to a trillion?
Mm-hmm.
Like, people don't realize how big a trillion is. And as I shared with you before we went live, if you're going to try and count to a trillion, $1 at a time, it'll take you 32,000 years to count to a trillion.
Incredible.
So, and we got the Fed strapping on over 5 trillion to their balance sheet in 1 year.
Mm-hmm.
And this is money. This is money that's just been created out of thin air. You know, the debt's been issued, and the Fed has bought it and has put it on their balance sheet. And when you create money in that extreme fashion, yes, that's why prices are going up.
Right. I'll get to
prices
that.
Will continue to go up.
I'll get to that in a second here. There's a lot you just said in terms of the dollar repudiation. You're in good company here. If you haven't watched this episode with Cliff High and Greg Hunter yesterday, Cliff was also talking about the fact that there is now, if you're looking at the math and the volume going through a crypto, international trade happening already in crypto. So people are moving away from the dollar. And what he was explaining is that this is happening at a faster and faster clip.
Yeah.
And we might get to that moment that Dick Allgeier and company were looking at maybe a year ago in this remote viewing about the death of the petrodollar, where they had all these congressmen heaving and puking and realizing that it was all over. And now we're seeing the signaling more and more now in precious metals. We're seeing that tremble right now. We're seeing the tightness in supply. And we're seeing this, as Andy Scheckman says, this energy in the air where people are in a mad rush to get rid of their dollars when they make a purchase. They're telling Andy, please let me wire you the money right away and then send me the metal. I just don't want to hold on to the money. Are we catching fire here, maybe in the mainstream news, or the main guy on the street type of thing here, realizing that the jig is almost up? You told me in my last episode that everybody was already de-dollarizing, and the last guy standing here was probably a bit clueless. But has the last guy standing started to clue in on what's happening? Is that what we're seeing now, Rob?
Well, look, in my view, smart money has already clued in. That the dollar is not a place where you want to have your nest egg exposed. You just smart money is trying to rid themselves of dollars and get long real assets. Now, whether that's productive farmland, it certainly isn't or hasn't been, to my reckoning, commercial real estate. Our economy is not doing well to begin with.
Right.
Commercial real estate is offered pretty much without really any traction on the bid side. That hasn't translated yet into residential real estate. I believe it will. And I also believe that as the dollar gets shakier and shakier, and as the Fed continues to monetize more and more debt that the U.S. federal government issues, the dollar and banks are going to basically start to withhold credit. And the reason why banks won't participate in loaning money when the currency is going to, in my view, absolutely do a major meltdown. And the reason why banks will withdraw credit from the markets is that they don't want to get repaid in devalued dollars when they get repaid, or if they get repaid. So at some point, Jean-Claude, the banks who have been anti-metal and the banks who have been anti anything that's contra the dollar, whether it's crypto, whether it's precious metal, they basically signed a pact where they promised each other they won't buy these things. They won't buy metal. As far as I'm concerned, the last financial institution that really got long metal was Bear Stearns, and look what happened to them.
Yeah.
So, and Bear Stearns learned a lesson, and they paid for it with their very existence by getting long metal. That's why they were chosen for extermination back in 2007. And that's a contribute to what many people believe happened to Bear Stearns. But lo and behold, I mean, Bear Stearns was ultimately wrapped into J.P. Morgan for nothing. And when the two books were commingled, J.P. Morgan's serial short of metal futures reduced. So the only way you can have a reduction when you add something to a position that is serially short, and the short gets much smaller, you've added a long. So they were long metal, and they were chosen for extermination specifically because they were long metal. You see, because everyone thinks that Bear Stearns went out of business because they were long subprime AAA rated debt that failed. First time in the history of credit markets, of course, AAA failed. Nobody likes to talk about that fact. But I mean, the whole issue with AAA failing, and then for the gurus in the financial press, the mainstream financial press, or the legacy financial press, for them to say that Bear Stearns failed. I mean, Bear Stearns was loaded to the gunnels, yes, with AAA rated subprime paper that failed. But so was Goldman Sachs, so was Merrill Lynch, so was Morgan Stanley. But it was Bear Stearns that was chosen to fail. They were chosen precisely because they were long metal. Okay, they weren't part of the club. And they got very upset back in the days of the long-term capital debacle, because they grumbled and complained, because they knew in that time, they knew that the whole long-term fiasco and why it had to be bailed out in secret was because there was a metal play involved where the Bank of Italy had leased gold and taken the proceeds and invested them in long-term capital. And then when long-term capital went under, because they made a huge leverage bet in Russian debt, and Russia defaulted on their debt, and that's what took down long-term capital. And of course, then the secretive meetings occurred. They were arranged at the offices of the New York Federal Reserve, with the point man for the workout. The secretive workout, of course, was Jim Rickards, who was the legal counsel for long-term capital at the time. And Bear Stearns was the only dissenting voice when everybody at the table, all the stakeholders in long-term capital, were told they all had to take a haircut, and it all had to be done in secret. And the guys at Bear Stearns knew that the reason it was being done in secret was because there was a gold trade involved where the Bank of Italy had leased their gold and put the proceeds with. And of course, who was Long-Term Capital's financial advisor? And the Bank of Italy's financial advisor. And who was the finance minister of Italy? Well, the Italian finance minister was a guy named Mario Draghi.
Draghi, yeah.
And his financial advisors were Goldman Sachs.
Yeah.
And you see, Italy was having trouble qualifying financially for the euro.
Enter the EU, yeah.
Yeah, and the whole deal about getting in or qualifying for inclusion in the euro were conditions that were laid out under a financial agreement called the Maastricht Treaty, which was these conditions were established in the early 1990s, and failure to conform to Maastricht Treaty guidelines is what got Britain knocked out of it was called the exchange rate mechanism, or the ERM. I remember this well because I was in capital markets and working on a trading desk back in that time frame, and I remember it very well. So it's funny, these arcane things, the way they stick in your mind. Anyway, these guys at Bear Stearns, they got very cranky when they were told they had to take a haircut, and they said, "Why should we take a haircut? Because you guys were screwing around in the gold market." That was their position. Well, that's not being a good player in the global.
It wasn't a good club member. Yeah.
No, you're not a good club member. Yeah. So you get a little red star beside your name, because the communists who run global financial affairs don't like it when they're outed, and Bear Stearns was certainly outing them, or trying to out them. Anyway, they paid dearly for it about 8 years later, because in 2007 they were chosen as the sacrificial lamb, and they got to burn on the cross, or get nailed to the cross, or whatever, however you want to say it. They were a sacrificial lamb. Yeah. And Goldman Sachs and Merrill Lynch, of course, was wound into Bank of America. Goldman Sachs was bailed out through a shenanigan of what they had insurance contracts with AIG. AIG was insolvent and couldn't honor the insurance contracts that they had written for Goldman Sachs. And so they bailed. The feds bailed out AIG so that they could make good, so that Goldman Sachs didn't go down. But the whole investment banking community was poised for a daisy chain domino collapse, like a string of dominoes. And out of that whole effort, we had Bear Stearns selectively executed, because they were long metal and weren't a good team player. And Lehman Brothers, and I love the way people refer to this whole financial crisis back in the 2007 to 9 timeframe. I hear it referred to all the time as the Lehman moment. The Lehman moment? Really? Is Christmas Day the Rudolph moment? Not quite. I mean, really, give me a break. And to say that the 2007 to 9 financial crisis was the Lehman moment. AAA credit failed. First time in the history of AAA credit failing. And when AAA credit fails, paper markets, as in commercial paper, commercial paper acts in our financial universe like blood in our body. If you don't have blood in your body, you're dead. And if you don't have a functioning commercial paper market in a capitalist economy, it's dead. Dead on arrival. It's gone. And the reality is AAA failed. First time in the history of credit markets. Nobody knew what a safe investment was anymore. And so the paper markets ground to a complete halt. And banks didn't want to lend any money, because nobody knew if they were ever going to get repaid on anything, because AAA had failed. You see, AAA is the bedrock on which everything in our financial universe is built on. It's the bedrock. And AAA, up until that point in time, had never failed. AAA can get downgraded to AA or single A, but and I have said this before in other interviews. What they rated AAA was garbage. Yeah. It was worse than garbage. It was bleep. Like, it was bad bleep. And that stuff should have never been rated AAA. And the people, the Moody's, the Fitches, the S&Ps of the world who do credit rating, they should have all gone to jail for life for rating that crap AAA. But that didn't happen. So, and to be honest, that's why our financial universe is in the horrible shape it's in today, because nobody's been held to account for anything.
Right.
Crimes against humanity have been conducted in the open, and regulators have allowed it to occur because, by and large, the people conducting this have had the nod from government that this is the way it's going to be, or the people that control government.
Yeah, I was going to say, not only did they look the other way, which would be bad enough, but they actually encouraged it. This is part of the system and the fleecing or mechanism of control of the planet. Yeah.
The important takeaway, at least to me, from all this, Jean-Claude, is, you see, this is why we are inflating the way we are today. You see, this is a direct carry-on from the negligence and the mismanagement. I mean, we technically should have had a severe, and I mean a severe, recession back when we had the financial crisis. The system should have blown up then. But what we did, we effectively put a Band-Aid on an axe wound and said, let's carry on like it never happened. And in doing so, more malfeasance was absolutely invited and supported and encouraged.
Right.
And that's why we are where we are now.
We'll get into the setup here for this confluence of events in a moment. I want to track back on that, but I don't want to forget this point. And I don't know that you can answer this question, but to me, be very delicate on your words too. And I'm going to try also, and I've never expressed this before. You talked about not being a good team member. In 2007-8, when all this was happening, at the time, the Minister of Finance here in Canada, by the name of Jim Flaherty, was called to Washington, D.C. And as I understood it, he was not necessarily a good team member. Apparently, he was trying to find a better position for Canada, and they didn't want to play as much that game that was being played in terms of the bail-ins and the backstops, as we called it here in Canada. And it didn't turn out for him too well with his health in the next couple of years. And I wondered if you had any thoughts on perhaps what had happened there, and if I'm right in cluing in that he wasn't wanting to be a good team member with the Americans.
Yeah, well, in the last 20, 30 years, Canada has not always been in lockstep with the American establishment in terms of, I'm going to say from a financial standpoint.
Right.
We have not always been in lockstep. And yes, Flaherty and the Harper regime, and I don't really have a lot of kind things to say about Harper. He's an old schoolmate of mine. He grew up on my street in the West End of Toronto. He went to my high school. He was one grade ahead of me. He's not. Let's put it this way: in my high school that had 800 students, he was probably never voted to be anybody who would amount to anything. But he did very well. He eventually he left Toronto. He went to the I guess Calgary, and he became an underling of Preston Manning, which was the Reform Party that was Western Canadian based, and that's where their genesis was. And then the Reform Party got folded into the Conservative Party of Canada, after they were beaten severely in a federal election in the early 90s. But Flaherty, I think, had a conscience, and Harper may have had somewhat of a conscience too, financially. He may very well have. But I mean, we have had episodes in the last 30 years in Canada where we have departed from, let's just say, guidance emanating from the Federal Reserve, where we've gone on some very, very stiff inflation control, raising rates, short-term rates. On a couple of occasions, I remember rates being raised dramatically in Canada when they weren't raised in a similar fashion in America. And that this has periodically wreaked havoc on our currency. Not being this whole idea of not being a good team player and not being in lockstep, which is a word we hear bandied about quite frequently in the world today. It doesn't leave you in the good books of the people who really control the shots or call the big plays on the global stage financially. And it leaves you let's just say, very vulnerable if you're not on the right page.
Go ahead.
Anyway, I was just going to say, it seems to me that Canada today, with current leadership, seems to be a very good, obedient team player. Let's put it that way.
Right now, yes, absolutely. And in those years, I'm bringing up James Flaherty here. I used to know him and work with him at Queen's Park, and I've always felt that, yes, indeed, he did have a conscience. Now, he was a politician and he was part of a team also, and sometimes you have to toe the party line. But in many instances, he refused to toe the party line, both provincially and, of course, federally, under Harper as well. And I think he was working really hard on behalf of Canadians during this financial crisis, and perhaps that was to his detriment. Anyways, my heart goes out to him and his family. You talked about this agreement with the banksters before this Lehman moment, which was actually not the Lehman moment, but a AAA failing. And this agreement was that these banks together would agree to not buy into precious metals, which of course Bear Stearns had violated. Now, is that agreement now null and void? Are they perhaps the people who are making up this others category right now on the COMEX, rapidly accumulating physical gold and silver right now ahead of what's to come? What's changed in that landscape here for the audience?
What has changed is there are countries around the world, and like let's name some names. Certain countries like Venezuela, for instance, Iran is another one, for instance. Factually, they have been cut off from transacting dollars. They've been excluded from what's called SWIFT, which is an international payment system that's dollar-centric, which is controlled by the Fed and the European Central Bank predominantly as the two key players, but strongly and most heavily influenced by America. And America has basically decided that Venezuela and Iran to be punished as a means of punishment cannot settle dollar transactions through the international payment system to settle international accounts. So with necessity being the mother of all invention, and with Iran and Venezuela chiefly having energy that China needs, the oil continues to flow. And despite what anyone else may say to you regarding international trade, oil continues to flow from Iran and from Venezuela, chiefly to China, who needs that. But dollars are of no use to, effectively, are of no use to either Venezuela or Iran. And so how do you think they're settling their oil trades? They're settling them in crypto. And how do I know that? Look at the dollar volume of crypto.
Mm-hmm.
$50 trillion annualized run rate on crypto transactions. The only way you get to a number that big. You see, let's look at it this way. I say that, international trade accounts are being settled in crypto. I'm going to play a little game with you. And it's because this is metaphorically the equivalent. I want you to think, Jean-Claude, of something that weighs thousands of pounds. It's gray. It has a trunk, big floppy ears, and a tail. What do you think that is? I didn't have to say what it was, did I?
Mm-hmm.
Because there's only one thing in the world it can be. And
walk like it, talk like it. It's what it is.
You see, and when you've got $50 trillion in cryptos transacting, mm-hmm. there's only one thing predominantly that gets you to a number that big. And it's not you and me trading it back and forth. Mm. And it's not you and me buying, dogdirt.com or dogdirtcoin for, $5,000 and trading it back and forth a few times.
Right.
That is huge macro capital flow.
Right.
And that has trade settlement written all over it, and it's bigger than an elephant. Mm-hmm. And that's what it is. So it is occurring, and denying that it's occurring is the equivalent of putting your head somewhere where the sun doesn't shine. Right. So, if that's the way you really want to approach things, have at it. But right. That's what's going on.
Mm-hmm. And when do you think?
And why is that occurring? So, right. And you see, so now let's think about the ramifications of all that. The ramifications are countries that formerly did their trade in crude oil in dollars now don't have those dollars. Well, where did the dollars go? Who has those dollars? I mean, those dollars didn't disappear. Mm-hmm. America continues to issue more and more new debt. I mean, the American deficit last year was how many trillions in 1 year? Mm-hmm. And that gets added to an existing debt pile. You see, the reason why countries around the world have dollars in their reserve accounts is so they can buy things like oil. Mm-hmm. But suddenly, when a big chunk of the world's oil trade, you see, the American dollar is referred to as the petrodollar. And when countries around the world don't need dollars anymore to buy oil, what happens to the dollars? Mm-hmm. They come home.
They come home to roost. Yeah.
And what happens when they come home?
Yeah, you and I talked about this.
Prices go up.
Yeah, and we're seeing it now.
Prices go up.
Yeah.
You see, it's sort of like what happens if you spring a leak in your basement. Everything gets wet, and the house fills up, and it causes problems. And especially when instead of turning the water off out at the street, think about doubling the amount of water that's coming into your house instead of stopping it. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what's going on metaphorically with dollar creation. I mean, the reaction to the pandemic, has manifested itself in massive outlays by governments to take, what's explained to us as corrective action. Mm-hmm. And as that's occurring, more and more new money is being created out of thin air, and fewer people around the world are willing holders of the new money that's being created, because less and less dollars are being used in international trade with each passing week and each passing month. Fewer dollars are being used in international trade. This situation is going to intensify, and more dollars are going to be required, less and less dollars are going to be required to settle international trade accounts. And dollars are America's biggest export to the world. Mm-hmm. And who wants them or who's going to need them? The dollars are starting to return home, which is why we are seeing transitory inflation.
Mm-hmm.
And as more and more dollars return home, we're going to learn that the inflation that was first said to be transitory isn't transitory at all. It's going to become structural and permanent.
Mm-hmm.
And the dollars are going to continue coming home. And America, you see, here's the issue too. America is showing no signs of letting up on their spending, are showing no signs of becoming more prudent or disciplined in their management of their financial affairs. If anything, it looks like the amount of debt America will have this year will be bigger than last year. And I mean, last year the Fed's balance sheet grew by $5 trillion. So what's the Fed's balance sheet going to be next year? Is it going to be
$5 trillion? Is what they're admitting to, of course.
Yeah. Well, there you go. And there's as far as I'm concerned, if you follow the work of Dr. Mark Skidmore and Catherine Austin Fitz, their work is highly supportive to the notion that there's a great deal more money being created than what is admitted. Dr. Skidmore's most recent work centered on the year 2019, where in the Social Security Trust complex, which has under its umbrella roughly $400 billion in investable retirement assets. And the chief manager, of course, of that is none other than a company called Blackrock. And they turned over those $400 billion in investable assets to the tune of over $44 trillion in 1 year.
How does that work, Rob?
Well, Dr. Skidmore has put the question directly to the U.S. government, but he's not getting any answers. Okay,
yeah, surprising.
And surprise, surprise.
Yeah,
nobody wants to talk about
national security issue in FASB 56, right in your face.
No, it's to me it stands, Jean-Claude. It stands as a big neon sign that says fraud. Fraud is occurring here with a big arrow, right to the Social Security Trust Administration, and that's where I believe the real guts of money creation is occurring, in my view. I think the money's created there. I think the money is then housed in let's say hidey holes like the Exchange Stabilization Fund, which I talk about at length and have for many years. But nobody else likes to talk about that, because if you work for anybody instead of yourself, talking about the Exchange Stabilization Fund, if you wear a pinstripe suit to go to work, you're going to get fired, because that is not admissible to be discussed or talked about anywhere. Not in the genteel, civilized world.
Right. Bad teammate, Mr. Rob Kirby. You're a bad teammate.
I am a bad teammate. But that's okay. I'm used to being a bad teammate.
Where do we go from here, Rob? You and I talked about this, of course, when it hit the news that this was signaling something that in your mind had already occurred. We were already seeing this international trade being done with gold, silver, and crypto. But the rest of the world hasn't really been told the news yet that the petrodollar is actually dead. We're seeing the results of it now. This hyperinflation, as you're saying, it's not transitory. It's absolutely permanent, and it's going parabolic here as we speak every day here moving forward. So where does this all end? Do we have to come back to a moment where to bring back some level of confidence in the dollar? Are we going to see a rebacking of the dollar here with gold, maybe silver, maybe something else, to maybe finally end this 50-year of temporary suspension from the gold standard? How do you see that happening?
Well, my view is that ultimately humanity will be forced back to some semblance of honest money, and exactly what the makeup of that is going to be, Jean-Claude, it's open for debate. Now, my feeling is we could very well end up for a period of time using cryptocurrencies as the world's reserve. We could very well, and the dollar in its current incarnation is dead on arrival in my books, at least in my view. There's going to be no recovery for the dollar. My personal view is America doesn't have any gold, so America is going to resist ever backing their currency with gold again, because I don't believe they have any. There has been no credible audit of American gold since the Eisenhower administration in the 1950s. So, there's a reason why there hasn't been a credible audit. And in my view, it just reeks of the notion that they don't have any, or they certainly don't have the amount they claim they have. America claims to have over 8,000 metric tons of gold, and I don't believe they have any.
Right.
So, and other than what they can scrape together on an annual basis, to run their Gold Eagle and Silver Eagle programs.
Or maybe stealing gold from Ukraine and other places.
Well, you never know, because America does allegedly have gold that they hold in trust for other countries, and how much of that they may or may not have dipped into, I don't know.
Right.
Except we can cite examples of America holding gold in trust for Germany, and back 5-6 years ago, when Germany asked if they could have some of their gold back, they were told no.
And then they were told yes, but in 7 or 8 years.
and then they said, if we can't have our gold, if we can't have it, can we come and just do an audit on our gold? And they were told no. No, you can't do that either. You can't, your gold, you cannot come and visit it. So, but hey, that sounds a lot like today when you have a sick relative in the hospital and you say, can I come and see them? And they say, no. Nope, not allowed.
Not allowed, sir.
And don't ask questions.
Right. Good day, sir.
Good day, sir.
You just mentioned that the Americas here, maybe the United States, if they don't have gold, they'd resist to any movement to reback or to go back to any type of sound money. Yet there are some analysts who are looking at the situation here with Evergrand in China, and perhaps this is a different can of worms altogether. Maybe China, seeing as they do have physical gold and silver, maybe they would be more willing here to look at a repricing of these assets in order to maybe shore up the damages that are being caused here by the Evergrand bond debacle. What are your thoughts on that?
Like, to clear the air on what I think about the Evergrand situation. Evergrand, as far as I know, has never been rated AAA. Okay? If the world can survive the AAA subprime debacle, which it did, through chicanery, I'll admit. But if the world can survive AAA failing, I think Evergrande is probably rated triple Z or triple M or triple whatever it is, but it's nothing anywhere near investment grade. If you see, here's the thing: if you buy junk and it fails, it's like shame on you, okay? Because you should have known, right? Like if you buy a load of manure and you end up putting it in your garden, then so be it. Like, you're not going to take a load of manure and put it in your freezer and try to serve it, to people for dinner, because you know what you have. And that's what Evergrande is. So to me, it's buyer beware, and people shouldn't be shocked if something rated triple C fails. And that's probably what it is, if it's triple C.
Right. Well, in this last news article here, this is the 28th of September, so there might be more since then, but they were downgraded to C here on the 20th.
Yeah, well, that's non-investment grade, okay?
Right.
You see, so trying to make the comparison between Evergrande and what happened in America in 2007 to 9, understand there's a big difference between C and AAA. The difference is huge. The difference metaphorically between C and AAA is the difference between an elephant and a mouse. And like I don't find a little gray mouse all that dangerous or threatening. But a herd of charging elephants is something completely different. And
so you don't think Evergrand here could cause some havoc in our financial system, or
it could absolutely. Hey, listen, Jean-Claude, it could cause ripples for sure.
Right.
But I mean, I'd like to know who owns all the Evergrande bonds.
Mm-hmm.
I'd really like to know who owns them. And I wouldn't be surprised if America might own a lot of them. If the Exchange Stabilization Fund might have their name on a whole bunch of them. Right. Expressly for the purpose of having some financial levers they can pull on China.
And Australia.
And well, exactly. But right. I mean, let's put it this way. You see, I'm of the persuasion, and my work tells me it's very likely that inside the Exchange Stabilization Fund there might very well be $150 trillion. And people might think I'm crazy to say that, and that's fine. You're entitled to your opinions, but I look at it this way. You see, I'm also a believer in the work of a specific body of work done by Chris Martenson, Dr. Chris Martenson. And he produced a piece, a video expose back in 2009 called The Crash Course. And what the Crash Course outlines is how fiat money with compound interest behaves over its life cycle. Mm-hmm. And what happens when you have fiat money with compound interest is that the amount of money in existence grows in the beginning at a very shallow curve upward to the right, but very shallow, until it reaches an inflection point where money growth goes vertical and parabolic up. And the dollar is on the vertical curve now, where increasingly larger amounts have to be created, and it's not Rob Kirby thinking this. It's math. It's pure mathematics. Fiat money with compound interest reaches an inflection point where it grows vertical, and the amounts created can't be contained by the system. And if you stop that growth, the whole system collapses on itself of its own weight. Mm-hmm. And we are inflating. And you see, the real problem for the Fed is, where do they put the money? They don't know where to put the money. They can't retire all the debt, because if they retired all the debt, the whole world would know that they've got way more money than they ever admitted. And the dollar would collapse overnight. Yeah. And they won't allow that to happen. So where are they putting the dough? Where are they hiding it? Well, the Exchange Stabilization Fund was created in 1933. Its mission statement basically was to ensure the dollar's use in international trade forever. Mm-hmm. So that's what its goal is. So how do they do that? Well, they do that by supporting things that are central to the dollar existence, like the dollar debt market. Some of those proceeds are used to make the stock market look robust, and that's why you have the likes of Blackrock and Vanguard, the two of them, that own basically and control basically every enterprise in the world. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's been talk about Blackrock, a lot of talk in recent weeks over the percentages. And it's like, I look at it this way. Blackrock was created in 1988. Months after basically the same time period as the creation of something called the Plunge Protection Team, and it's formally known as the President's Working Group on Financial Markets. And that was created in the aftermath of the 1987 stock market crash during the Reagan administration. And they created this plunge protection team to ensure that we didn't have another near wipeout of our financial system, which we came very close to in 1987. And they basically jerry-rigged the bond markets through the proliferation of interest rate derivatives, where banks have, I refer to them as the Magnificent Five, which would be J.P. Morgan, Bank of America, Citibank, Morgan Stanley, and Goldman Sachs. These five institutions in America have derivatives books, which are probably at least 80% composed of interest rate products. But these five institutions, either now or in the recent past, have had books as big as 50 trillion each, and some bigger. So they garnered or gained control of the bond and the interest rate complex through the interest rate derivatives. So, and then at the same time, it would go to make a lot of sense to me that they would also want an entity that would have or allow them to harness and take control of the equity complex, which is the stock market. Because a healthy stock market is, one of the chief signals of a healthy currency. If you have a healthy currency, and if you have a healthy economy, you should have a healthy equity market.
All right.
And so I find it very interesting that Blackrock was created basically in the same breath as the creation of the President's Working Group on Financial Markets, or the Plunge Protection Team. And I mean, Blackrock in 30 years has grown to be the biggest asset manager on the planet. And they, along with Vanguard, who are connected at the hip, like the biggest holder in BlackRock, the biggest single owner in BlackRock is Vanguard, and the biggest single owner in Vanguard is BlackRock. So these two things, it's hard to tell them apart. But these two financial houses together, they are the biggest shareholders in the likes of. I'll give you and this is not an exhaustive list. Okay, but together, these two institutions own 16% of Citibank, 11.5% of J.P. Morgan, 10% of Bank of America, 14% of Goldman Sachs, only 6.5% of Morgan Stanley, 12% of Microsoft, 11% of Apple, 11.5% of Facebook, 12% of Google, 11% of Netflix, 12.5% of ExxonMobil, 15% of Northern Trust, United Airlines 14%, American Airlines 14%, Boeing 11%, AT&T 12%, Raytheon 13%, Northrop Grumman 11%, State Street, massive financial house in its own right, 14%, Pfizer 12.5%, J&J 13%, Moderna 9%, Tesla 9%, Amazon 9.5%, Verizon 15%. Who's that one? Berkshire Hathaway 15%. Basically, the death industry, which is all the huge companies that control the funeral homes and anything to do with the death, they own like 25 and 26% of the biggest companies that do that. Who else? I think we hit on Apple, Facebook. Yeah, we got all those. But I mean, you see, this is not an exhaustive list. And I think I said Tesla, Verizon, Berkshire. Yeah. I went through all these. Anyway, these were just a grouping of names that I spent 20 minutes at my desk just plugging in, who are the biggest shareholders of these. So, and you'll find that just about any company you can think of under the sun, you're going to find that BlackRock and Vanguard are the number 1 and number 2 shareholders of everything on the planet.
So you just mentioned under the sun and on the planet, and I wanted to go here with you. I was waiting for you to finish this exhaustive list here, and it's just very a surface.
It's not that exhaustive. It's just a few names I cherry picked. But,
and it's still very interesting. And I wanted to ask you, it wouldn't be a woo-woo show if I didn't ask you this question. You said earlier, where are they putting all this money? Is it possible, in your view, that they're putting this money in another system that is not our system here? And you know what I'm saying? What do you think?
I'm gonna answer that this way. I think they have way more money than anyone understands. And the reason they have way more money than anyone understands is because of this whole issue with fiat money with compound interest.
Mm-hmm.
The amount of money being created is way bigger than anyone understands. And understand it this way, if the money being created isn't continually created, compounding with more and more and more every year, the whole system blows up. So they are creating it because the system hasn't blown up yet. So we know they're creating it because mathematically they have to.
Mm-hmm.
So the real question is, where are they putting it? Has it not occurred to anybody that America, I read something this morning. Janet Yellen said that the United States government was going to run out of money by December 15th. Does that mean they're going to recall all their aircraft carriers and all the nuclear subs are going to return to base, and that America isn't going to entertain, getting involved militarily in places like Venezuela or Syria or the Ukraine or the South China Sea or in Korea? When is the last time you ever heard anyone say America can't build their next nuclear aircraft carrier because they don't have enough money?
Mm.
There's always enough money there's never enough money to do stuff at home that might create or directly fuel inflation, right? Social spending, there's always a question of whether we can afford that.
Mm-hmm.
But boy, anything that the military industrial complex needs, not a problem at all. If we need 2 new nuclear aircraft carriers, we get them. If we need 600 new state-of-the-art attack aircraft, we get those too. Mm-hmm. If we need 300 new helicopters, we get those. If we need to put up another 50 or 100 or 300 telecommunication satellites, there's always money for that.
Or the next iteration of the Solar Warden fleet.
All I'm saying, listen, look at what's occurring as opposed to the rhetoric we get.
Yeah.
The rhetoric we get is that money's tight. Okay? The rhetoric we get, why is it, Jean-Claude, I've always wondered this one myself. I know when I bought my first car, which would have been in the 1970s, I paid for it with $1,000 bills. I went to the bank and I got $1,000 bills. I bought my first car, it was used. I bought it for $3,000. And I paid with 3 $1,000 bills. They don't make $1,000 bills anymore.
Mm-hmm.
There's never been more money ever. There has never been as much money being created than right now, ever in the history of mankind. But yet, the largest denomination of bill we have today is 100.
Mm-hmm. Why is that, Rob?
Why is that? It's like, look over here, and then over here, I'm gonna take something from you. Mm-hmm. It's misdirection, is what it is. Yeah. They want us to think that money is dear. They want us to think money is scarce. And the reality is, the real truth is, money is so plentiful that they don't even know where to put it.
Well, I think it was in the safety deposit box that Brian Mulroney was holding somewhere in New York after his deal with the what was his name?
That was in a brown envelope in his lapel pocket, I think, in his jacket pocket. And he forgot about that.
Yeah, Ronnie is saying I never saw $1,000 bill. I remember those purple or pinkish purple bills here way back when. They don't have that. Of course, they're making a joke of Brian Mulroney not reporting on his cash deals with the gun runner.
He forgot that he had $800,000 in a brown envelope in his breast pocket.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I would like to forget if I had that much money too.
Yeah, exactly. But when it became tax eligible, he reported those taxes. I remember.
Oh, of course. It was an oversight. Absolutely an oversight.
Yeah, just an oversight. Yeah. Oh my God. Always fun to have you on here, Bill. Rob, before we go, in the last couple of minutes here, we've talked about a lot of deep woo stuff here in the financial system, but for the man on the street, what can they do here? Of course, things are going worse and worse. Hyperinflation is hitting us. We're seeing the shortages in the supply line right now. We're seeing, even if you have money right now, having difficulty maybe getting the things that you actually need as opposed to the things you want. What can the little guy on the street do right now, seeing as these bigger macro players are already moving away from the dollar, using cryptocurrencies? What can a small guy do right now? Is that gold? Is it crypto? What say you?
I think you want to you want to be prepared, and I'm a believer in having some preps. I think you should have some storable food. I think that's very important because with supply chain issues arising as they have, we could see critical shortages of some key staples in our diets. So having some storable food, I think, is intelligent. How much depends on probably on your circumstance, and you got to be your own judge where that's concerned. Financially, I think you want to own. Probably you want to be long. I call them anti-dollar. The anti-dollar trades, and the anti-dollar trades to me are gold, silver, and cryptocurrencies. And I think you're going to be well served with metals ultimately. And the reason I say that, even though the price action on metals has been dismal over the last year and a half, I mean, not 2 months ago, but September last year, September of 2020. Just remember, the price of gold in September, at the beginning of September of 2020, gold was at 1,900 and Bitcoin was at 9,000. Today, Bitcoin's over 60,000 and gold isn't even 1,900.
Right.
But here's what I'm going to say about that. Gold prices and silver prices are suppressed. Okay, because the guys doing the suppressing are the American government. And they have this resource called the Exchange Stabilization Fund where they've hidden all this money that I've talked about. They use that money to effectively, basically to throw it away by suppressing and shorting futures in metal. And you see, the regulatory environment in the futures complex is such that regulators do not out their people that sign their paychecks.
Right.
Regulators are part of the government. And when the government's involved in nefarious price suppression of metals, regulators who are paid by the government aren't going to out their employer and say that what they're doing is crooked and wrong. We have laws, commodities laws on the books, which technically mean that these regulators should be outing the people that employ them, but they don't. Okay, and they're not going to anytime soon. And what will happen in the ultimately at the end of the day, what will happen is that these fraudulent price manipulating entities, whether it's COMEX or the LBMA, which is the London cohort in the metals supposed price discovery arena, you've got New York and London who set the price of metal, and when this all blows up, which it will ultimately, metals will be set free, and then you will see price of metals go up a lot like we've seen the cryptocurrencies.
Right.
And the reason why cryptocurrencies are not contained or haven't been contained to date is precisely because blockchain protocols prevent the selling of cryptocurrencies that don't exist. You can't sell a cryptocurrency that doesn't exist. Now, recently there have been attempts to corral the crypto markets. You know, a couple weeks ago we had the creation of the first Bitcoin ETF.
Yeah.
But the first Bitcoin ETF does not settle in actual Bitcoin. It settles in Bitcoin futures.
Mm-hmm.
What they're trying to do, hoping that nobody's paying attention, they're trying to corral the Bitcoin or the crypto prices using the same nefarious means they used to corral metal, namely futures. You see, and how do we know that that's occurring in metals? Because to begin with, there's a huge departure in physical metal price over what the futures price is. The two of them almost don't know each other. I mean, you know, we've got a silver price, for instance, at roughly, I think it's $25, give or take, today.
Yep.
I mean, but to buy a silver eagle, I think you probably are paying at least an $8 to $10 premium right now, if you're going to get any. Okay, and there might not even be any for sale. But I mean, I think you're closely affiliated, I believe, Jean-Claude, with Miles. It's Miles Franklin.
Miles Franklin, yeah, precious metals. Yeah.
And so I mean, what like, and Miles Franklin, I would say, are probably as good as anybody in terms of pricing on silver eagles.
Yeah.
What's the best price you can? Are they giving some away at $4 over spot? No, that's Britannia's.
Right.
But I mean, I see their maples are $5.25. I mean, think about that's a 20%. That's a 20. What is that? A 20%? More than 20%. Over 20% over the price.
Yeah.
That supposedly silver is.
Right. And that's cheap compared to other dealers. Right. Get your point.
And there are other outlets that are selling them for more and getting it.
Yeah.
And getting it.
Yeah.
So. Anyway, that the premium for physical over the alleged price tells you that there's something not right about the price.
Right.
There is something wrong about the price. It's not a true price. And you know, I think those premiums have been higher. And you know, I know 10 years ago they were a lot lower. And they've grown over time. I would expect over time that those premiums will continue to grow. But at some point, when this collusion and this suppression on metal breaks down, and they're free to trade in a free market, I don't think you're going to be able to buy them. So if you're not pre-positioned and own them, you won't get any. So with the cryptos, blockchain protocols mean you can't buy Bitcoin. You can buy a Bitcoin future, and you'll be able to buy a Bitcoin future anytime. You know, and you see that is in my view anyway, that's a crass attempt on the part of officialdom to try and deflect money into the futures complex, where they can effectively neutralize. You see, they want people to believe that if they buy a Bitcoin future or the Bitcoin ETF, that they have exposure to Bitcoin, and they don't. So, but I don't think the investment community is going to fall for that, because I think the investment community realized that they've been screwed in the metals with futures. And I think ultimately the Bitcoin ETF, futures-based ETF, will fail, because it just won't. It's not going to gain traction. I don't believe, not in the way it needs to have any kind of a long life.
Well, everything is failing, and we started this conversation with this interview with Cliff, and guys, go check it out. But in here, Cliff was also talking about not just crypto, but physical gold and silver. But he was talking about the word unobtainium here in US dollars, meaning that nobody would want to sell any of the gold or silver or crypto, for US dollars. So there might be a period of time here
Yeah.
where it's difficult to get those assets, as Rob is saying. So do go check that out. I just put in the live chat now my Telegram account. I see a lot of people are asking for my Telegram account. Yes, I do post all my upcoming shows there as well, so you guys can check that out. If you're looking for physical gold and silver, please do try the link here, and these are the discounts afforded to the Beyond Mystic audience. You can find that at beyondmystic.net/silver. And as Ronnie was saying in the chat here, yeah, get it while you can. There's some tight supply here happening. I'm getting our friend here, Craig Hemke, is coming on the show tomorrow to explain what's happening here with options expiration. So that's going to be a great conversation. I'm also getting Andy Sheckman back on the line tomorrow afternoon to talk about the tightness in supply and what's been happening here at the Royal Canadian Mint and also at the US Mint as of late. So you guys don't want to miss that. Thank you so much, Rob. What a conversation here today. There's a lot for us to digest. And I think at the end of the day, you're giving great advice here. It's all about being prepared, and start being prepared here in the mindset. You really have to look at things and not put your head in the sand, as you said. Because with your hand in the sand, you don't see that tsunami coming, and that tsunami is coming. Clear is that elephant, as you just described here, when you can smell it and see it and feel it with every bone of your body. You know it's there, even though the mainstream media are not telling you. So we are looking at some difficult times ahead here, and we hope that all of you watching the show can get a little bit of information here to give you some insights on how to protect yourself, your wealth, and your family here moving forward. So thank you so much, Rob. First of all, guys, you can find his work here at KIRBYanalytics.com. And this was another episode of the Hyperinflation Report with Mr. Rob Kirby. I'm Jean-Claude BeyondMystic. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Have a great day, and we'll see you soon. Au revoir.